The official story claims a tragic but romantic failure. It describes a sensitive crown prince and a delicate young princess. Their marriage was crushed by fate and politics. The records kept in the imperial archives show a reality far colder. Court doctors wrote about painful intercourse, ulcers, and discharge. They documented that the young crown princess, barely 20, became infertile. The cause was a violent venereal infection. The infection came from her husband, Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria-Hungary. Heir to the vast Habsburg throne, Rudolf roamed Vienna's brothels. He brought disease into his wife's body. The empire blamed her for failing to give him a son. In public, Princess Stéphanie stood beside him in parades, her jewels glittering. In private, she endured humiliating examinations and constant pelvic pain. Women who knew his nightlife whispered the blame onto her. After Rudolf's death at Mayerling, the empire manufactured a myth, a tale of the melancholy prince and the heartbroken widow. This fairy tale avoided one fact. Stéphanie of Belgium entered the marriage as a healthy teenager. She left it branded a failure, infected, and discarded. This is a document of male self-destruction, dynastic calculation, and a young woman's sacrifice. 1881. The calculation. Stéphanie entered the story as royal currency. Born in 1864, she was the daughter of King Leopold II of Belgium. Affection was rare in her palace. Her father viewed his children as pawns in a political game. By adolescence, her future had been debated by ambassadors and ministers. The Habsburg court had a problem in Vienna. Crown Prince Rudolf desperately needed a Catholic bride of suitable rank. Few young princesses met the dynasty's rigid requirements. Stéphanie was almost 17. She was healthy, properly royal, and convenient. Correspondence between the courts reads like a business contract. They exchanged health reports and weighed political advantages. No one asked the girl if she wanted the man. Her own early letters showed naive, hopeful belief. She imagined affection and partnership, a slight echo of the romantic operettas she knew. The Viennese court immediately destroyed that hope. Empress Elizabeth Sisi judged her instantly. Sisi had suffered under court life. Instead of empathy, records show she expressed contempt. She reportedly called Stéphanie an ugly bumpkin. She mocked her gowns, her figure, and her lack of glamour. The other women at court followed the Empress's lead. Ladies-in-waiting whispered about the new crown princess's country manners. They compared her skin and coiffure to Sisi's legendary beauty. Stéphanie was always found wanting. Beauty was the ultimate weapon in that palace. Stéphanie learned that a woman's worth could be destroyed by a single word from a prettier rival. 1881, 1883. The poisoned marriage. The wedding in 1881 looked perfect, a vision of rich fabrics and glittering decorations. Behind the scenes, Rudolf's restlessness and Stéphanie's nervousness were noted by witnesses. The marriage cracked almost immediately. Rudolf was 23. He was intelligent but unstable, politically frustrated, and deeply damaged. He drank heavily. He frequented prostitutes across Vienna. His private letters detailed his obsession with violent death and suicide. None of this was shared with the teenage girl handed to him as his wife. Contemporary reports dismissed the idea of a romantic consummation. Within a year, medical files mention symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection: lesions, burning pain, vaginal discharge. Court doctors began treating the crown prince discreetly. Soon after, they began treating Stéphanie. The diagnosis given to her face was a fraud. It was veiled in euphemisms like chronic inflammation, woman's weakness, and nervous troubles. The reality was clinical and cruel. She had contracted a venereal disease from her husband. The infection scarred her reproductive organs. She gave birth to one daughter, Elizabeth, in 1883. After the birth, she was declared medically unable to bear more children. In a dynasty obsessed with a male heir, this was a political death sentence. The architecture of blame. The court's reaction exposed the brutal system. No one publicly blamed Rudolf. His brothel visits were an open secret among courtiers. Officers joked about his conquests. Yet, when the disease destroyed his wife's fertility, the whispers targeted her. Women at court began calling the crown princess cold and unwomanly. They speculated about her body as if it were a defective object. They criticized her lack of charm, as if charm could somehow shield her from infection. The ladies who dressed her each morning later wrote about her changed appearance. They noticed constant fatigue and pallor. Instead of compassion, they joined the gossip. They spread the story that she seemed aged and withered before her 30th birthday. These women helped circulate the idea that she had failed as a wife. Female solidarity existed only in embroidered phrases, never in action. Stephanie's mother-in-law, Empress Elizabeth, only deepened the isolation. Elizabeth viewed her as a disappointment, neither fertile nor beautiful. At court functions, Elizabeth's legendary beauty drew every eye. By contrast, Stephanie was described as stiff, unsmiling, and too earnest. The system was brutally simple. A woman could be forgiven almost anything if she remained decorative and silent. Stephanie was neither. Rudolf's decline. Meanwhile, Rudolf's personal spiral accelerated. He increased his drinking. He took morphine. His affairs became public knowledge across Vienna. Showgirls, actresses, and women far outside his imperial rank passed through his bed. Each betrayal rippled back to Stephanie through her female attendants. Ladies in waiting heard the stories in the city and brought them to her, wrapped in false concern. Women in the opera boxes watched her face instead of the stage. They enjoyed the spectacle of the crown princess losing control of her husband. Others offered Rudolf sympathy behind her back to position themselves closer to power. The marriage became a strained performance of duty. In private, hostility replaced coldness. Stephanie's memoirs describe screaming matches and emotional neglect. She recorded that Rudolf often spoke of suicide, threatening to leave her behind. His mental state worsened. Political frustrations and addiction blended into a single destructive impulse. Instead of admitting his instability, courtiers hinted that his wife's frigidity had pushed him to extremes. Male failure required a female scapegoat. Blaming his wife was always safer than criticizing the imperial heir. January 1889, Mayerling. The climax came at Mayerling in January 1889. Rudolf retreated to his hunting lodge. He was accompanied by his latest mistress, 17-year-old Baroness Mary Wetzerer. The official story quickly shifted to a sanitized version of a murder-suicide. Romantic language softened the brutal facts. The reality was grim. 2 bodies in a remote lodge, a bullet to his head, a bullet to hers. Stephanie was not present. She received the news as a widow. When she asked for details, she was met with walls of silence. Documents show a coordinated effort to control her voice and what she knew. The Habsburgs needed a protective narrative. The dead prince remained tragic. The teenage mistress was deemed an unfortunate accomplice. The wife became a sidelined shadow. Far worse, family members suggested that if Stephanie had been more loving, Rudolf might not have sought death elsewhere. While her husband's blood dried at Mayerling, blame seeped toward her. The aftermath stripped her of almost everything. She lost her position as future empress. Her small daughter Elizabeth became a political pawn. Her father, King Leopold II, considered her a failed alliance. Legal disputes over inheritance and property exposed how little value a princess held once her dynastic use ended. The jackpot cluster of truths. In Vienna, Empress Elizabeth's faction ensured Rudolf was remembered as a tragic lost hope. Stephanie's version of events held little weight. Women who once served her focused on remaining in favour with the remaining Habsburgs. Their later memoirs often repeated that she had been difficult and unlovable. Female betrayal here was quiet, sustained, and precise. Ladies who had watched her painful treatment stayed silent about the disease's origin. They allowed historians to write of her sterility as her own mysterious failure. They wrote about her sharp tongue and hard features. They ignored the humiliation and infection she endured. The biggest reveals sit in the medical and personal records. First, medical files from 1540 reveal that doctors treated Rudolf for a venereal infection years before myeling. They used painful disinfecting injections. Shortly after, Stephanie was treated for identical symptoms. Her own writings confirm his illness left her unable to have more children. Second, Belgian archives hold a physician's record that states plainly, the Crown Princess suffers from ailments of venereal origin. A third document describes attempts to treat her with mercury. Mercury was the standard cure, but it was brutal. It caused tremors, salivation, and permanent organ damage. Her doctor wrote, "She cries from the pain, but must endure it." Third, court doctors protected Rudolf by harming her. Her treatments involved caustic solutions meant to purify the womb. These procedures burned her flesh. They left her bedridden for days, sometimes weeks. Her husband, meanwhile, continued visiting brothels. Fourth, internal memoranda show the court's only concern was succession. The worry was losing a potential male heir. No one worried that a young woman had been permanently injured by her infected husband. Fifth, female complicity was widespread. Empress Elizabeth, archduchesses, and ladies-in-waiting focused their sympathy on Rudolf. They saw him as sensitive and misunderstood. They rarely applied the same nuance to Stephanie. Descriptions of her focused solely on her personality and appearance. They erased the medical violence she suffered through. The ironic close Stéphanie refused to disappear. In 1900, she shocked royal society by marrying far below her rank. Her second husband, Count Elemer Lonye, was a Hungarian nobleman. The former crown princess became a minor countess on a rural estate. Society interpreted this as a fall. It was a refusal to remain a relic of the dynasty that had ruined her. The move cost her what remained of her position. Her father was furious. Her daughter, Archduchess Elizabeth, sided emotionally with the Habsburgs and her dead father's memory. A daughter blamed a mother for speaking the truth about a father she idolized. The cycle of female conflict continued into the next generation. Stephanie lived long enough to watch the Habsburg Empire collapse after the First World War. The dynasty that demanded her youth, health, and fertility dissolved into exile. The irony is sharp. She was sacrificed for an empire that did not survive her. Her story dismantles several illusions at once. Royal marriage was not romance. It was a contract. Wealth did not guarantee safety. Jewels did not protect her from blame, infection, or loneliness. Her body bore the scars of a disease acquired in a marriage she was never allowed to refuse. The women around her, mother-in-law, ladies-in-waiting, courtiers' wives, sided with power, not with the injured woman. They repeated jokes about her appearance. They preserved the prince's legend at her expense. Male failure was treated as invisible. Rudolf's recklessness set the tragedy in motion. Yet, for decades, biographies centered his pain. Her suffering became a footnote. A different image emerges from the palace archives, a body invaded by disease from a husband the world called tragic. A woman blamed for failing to produce a son after that disease destroyed her fertility. The girl once mocked as an ugly bumpkin survived the polished world that despised her. Royal history remembers crowns and suicides. It often skips the pelvic pain and whispered insults. The jewels, the disease, the gossiping women, and the loaded gun at Meyerling were all parts of the same story. Imperial records sit waiting in the dark. They remember the wives who paid for the sensibilities of tragic princes. They paid with their reputations, their bodies, and their lives lived in permanent blame. Stéphanie outlived the court that tried to erase her. She proved that even royal glamour is fragile.